Welcome back. All right, so news breaking has broken over the last couple of hours. This is still a developing story, but I think we've got the basics of what's happened here. So the PHF, the Women's Hockey League, has been bought. The Mark Walters Group and Billie Jean King Enterprises have bought the professional or the Premier Hockey Federation. Now, this group already finances the PWHPA, the Women's Union. A new league is being created. Now, apparently, it's going to be 6 teams. They had 7 in the PHF this past season, so that's a drop of 1 team, but it goes further than that. So let's go through this. Now, first off, all contracts in the PHF have been voided, and this is too bad. I even looked through some of the accounts for PHF teams in getting this video put together, and they were signing players on with new contracts, and look who we've got, and they were signing for record amounts of money. The interesting thing is, I remember when some of these contracts were being signed, and there's some of this, hey, this woman's going to get $100,000, and I was thinking, from where? And I say that because I know that these leagues have struggled financially, right? So the contracts that were being signed, they're not guaranteed. They're at will contracts, meaning at any point in time they could just be done away with. So it'd be like me giving you a contract saying, hey, here's a $25,000 contract for the next week. Psych, rip it up. And I can do that because it's an at-will contract. So the players didn't like this. There were some players that fought against it. There were some agents that were fighting against it as well, because of course they get a certain amount when a contract gets signed. And the idea of giving that back or not getting it at all, probably not attractive to the agent. So PWHPA players as well will have priority access to contracts. So this is where things get ugly. The women in the union, by all accounts, are usually your star players. A lot of the better known women's hockey players are in the PWHPA. But over the last few years, without those women in the professional league that's been playing, they've built up some women there as well. So PHF players will be added afterwards. So basically, it looks like the union will have the first crack at contracts for these teams, and then the PHF players would get added afterwards. It is not a pretty situation. Now, there's speculation that the PHF sale may have been in part because they were on the brink of bankruptcy. And this is one of those speculations that's out there. And it's something I had wondered about. Now, I know they had more money coming in from sponsorships and more money coming in from advertising, but it wasn't a pretty picture. I didn't think it looked like it was a pretty picture with the PHF, what was going on, right? So I also wanted to give thanks at this point to Jeff Merrick and Shayna Goldman, who have been posting the news and the updates regarding this throughout. I do recommend following both of them on Twitter. Shayna Goldman also writes on The Athletic. Now, the CWHL existed from 2007 till 2019. And when it dissolved, there was some idea that maybe the CWHL teams would be taken in by the NWHL, and maybe that would help. So the NWHL, the Women's League, that went from 2015 to 2021, before it was rebranded as the PHF in September of 2021, but it's essentially the same league. The NWHL, they added a team in Toronto, they added a team in Montreal, they did what they could. But the Canadian Women's League, it went under, and the union was founded on this idea of, we want a league that's going to succeed. We want a league that's financially viable. And the argument was that the PHF was not. Now, the PHF expanded, and the PHF, for their part, did all the bravado about how this league was growing. So they had 7 teams in 2022-2023, and the cap for next year was set at $1.5 million per team. That's not bad. Split 20 ways, that's not bad. It's nowhere near what hockey players in the NHL get. And there's been some talk too, like, oh, the women want it to be equal. No, the women in the union wanted to have a league that just, it was going to work. And the idea was, we want a league that works. They knew the CWHL didn't work, and they didn't have any faith in the NWHL, even after rebranded to PHF. That faith wasn't there. There were some in the union that over the last couple of years have stepped out of the union and gone to the PHF, but not in the kinds of numbers that would indicate that the union's been weakened, or that a large number of women are saying, you know what, we're gonna just give this up and just join the rest of the women in that league. Now, agent Spencer Gillis was actually planning on organizing a strike before this coming season to end the at-will contracts. Do away with them, because the idea of you can just tear up a contract whenever you want, what is the contract worth? It's not worth anything. So that is done because the league is still going to be called the PHF from what I can see here, but the league that was the PHF is gone, and so we've got new ownership and new players, and so all of that talk's going to fall aside. Now, Ian Kennedy is reporting that the plan is for one 6-team league, and so that would be 5 teams worth of players that are out of work because the PWHPA had 9 stops on their Dream Gap tours this season. They had 4 teams on the Dream Gap tour, and so that's 4 plus 7 is 11. There's 6 teams in this league. That's 5 teams worth of players out of work. And of course, with the PWHPA getting the first crack at the contracts, and there's 4 teams of players there, you do the math, and really the PHF players are going to have a hard time finding work this year. Now, the 2030 Isabel Cup. Now, I wanted to do more work on this because there's a lot of emotional reactions right now from people that feel like this is a huge step backwards for women's hockey, and this should never have happened. But it wasn't working, and this is the issue that I've had with it. It hasn't been working. For all of the hard work that some in the media have done to try to make this work and really improve the interest in the league and the league's profile, it just hasn't worked. There are plenty of people who just will not have any interest in women's hockey. It's just not going to be there. So that's something that women are up against with that as well, right? So the Isabel Cup had just over 1,500 in attendance. And I remember watching part of that game and thinking to myself, this is your final. It's in Arizona, and you have a little over 1,500 people. And you could see that it was sparsely attended. And it just visually on TV, it didn't help sell the game, right? It's like, okay, this is your final. It's a one game winner take all game, and it's a half empty building. So it just didn't end up looking like it was, this really healthy over the top. So when they were talking about, hey, we're gonna have a $1.5 million cap hit for everybody, and that the league's doing really well, I thought, but where? Because if you're not selling tickets, and if you're not on TV and getting the kind of TV revenue other leagues are, then you're relying on ads and sponsors, and ads from and sponsorships in general. If you don't have that TV exposure, those could dry up. So the semifinal tickets in Toronto, because I was looking for ticket prices for the Isabel Cup, the closest I could get was that the tickets in Toronto, so this is where you would think you could get your maximum amount of money for tickets, $25 for adults, $10 for youth in the games in Toronto, which was a best of 3 semifinal. So, I mean, if it, and I think they got 650 in attendance, something in that region. And there was debate about whether or not they needed a different building for that. But of course, it's not free. You're not usually going to find buildings that say, "Hey, come on in, we'll absorb all the costs and you can play for free here." Now, the single game final went to a 4-3 overtime win for Toronto over Minnesota because Minnesota's not allowed to win anything. But I mean, as exciting as that final was for fans of the PHF, and they have the streaming that they were doing as well that seemed to be doing pretty well. It didn't feel to me like there was enough there to warrant giving everybody raises and looking to expand. Expansion's tricky. Like, I've seen people complaining about the fact there's going to be fewer teams. But if your league is losing money, and the PHF, by all accounts here, appears to have been losing money, you have to cut travel costs. That's the first thing you have to do. You have to cut travel costs. So if you have one team that's further out than everybody else, well, that's going to increase your travel costs right there. And having those extra teams, it's not easy. Because again, if your league's flourishing, sure, expand away. But if it's not, that expansion is going to further strain things. It's along the same lines as if you have a company that you have certain expenses that are expensive and you're kind of drawing a profit. You would think, well, if you expand, you'll make more money. Not necessarily, because those expenses go up and you can start losing way more money than you were when you were a smaller company. That can happen. And it feels like with this league, that absolutely could be part of it. I'm just saying part of it. So the PWHPA was founded in March of 2019. We have been talking about this war between the union and what was the NWHL and what is now the PHF for over 4 years. And there has been no real noticeable change in the profile for women's hockey, though the Dream Gap Tour for the PWHPA seemed to generate some excitement there. They seem to generate some ticket sales. And I've often said, and I've had people telling me, no, that doesn't work. I don't know if a women's league, a traditional league like what we have with men's hockey, I don't know if financially that can be made to work. Because I don't know if you can find enough people that will pay the money to go out and watch it. And I'm just saying that just from strictly the perspective that it hasn't been there. The CWHL goes under. The NWHL had its issues, rebranded, expanded, tried to, this rosy picture and all that. But how many changes have we seen at the top of the PHF? How many times have we seen turmoil within the union or anything else? And it's just, it really comes down to you have to make a profit, right? Now, members will be voting to ratify, apparently it's a one-of-a-kind CBA in the coming days. What I think is interesting is that it's the PWHPA union that, according to the wording of what I read, will be doing the voting on this. So, I mean, for the PHF members, they're kind of out, and I'm not trying to belittle that they've been out there working. Very often with professional hockey players, the women, they're spending more money than they're making. That has been the problem that women have gone through, and I've talked about that many times in videos, where when you have it where they're paying for their own travel, when they're paying for their own equipment, when they're paying for everything, they very often are paying more money than what they're making. And that is a situation that doesn't work. And that's part of how that union was forged, with the idea that we're going to find a way to make money and make this work. Now, January 2024 is expected to be the start date for the new women's league. Again, likely to still be called the PHF. There's a lot of anger about how many women are going to be out of work who were in the PHF last year, and I totally understand that. But if the league was going bankrupt, they would have been out of a job anyways. I don't know that the National Hockey League jumps in, because I've seen that as well with, hey, the NHL now has to jump in and they have to help. They don't really have to, first off. And secondly, I think they're going to want things to settle out a little bit, and they want to see that stability first. If you're going to buy in, if you're going to invest in something, you want it to be a stable business that works, right? It's really very similar to whether if you're Canadian, it's Dragon's Den, Shark Tank in the States. Somebody comes and they try to sell you on this business plan. One of the first things you ask is, what do your profits look like? What are your expenses? What are your revenues? What do you project for next year? What have you already made this year? What's your year over year? Which way are you trending? And all of these questions, when it comes to women's hockey, it generally has not been towards the positive. I want it to be. I absolutely do. I want to see women's hockey succeed as a professional league. I just don't know how this is going to work. Now, it looks like there's some good money coming in with the new owners, and I understand that people are going to be upset with certain players losing their jobs. There will be some who were in the PHF last year who will keep jobs. There are probably going to be some union members who may end up being cut by teams as well. But it really is, I think, a case of they have to scale this back. They have to find a way to make this work. And then you can talk about expansion. Then you can talk about, getting to a league of 10, 12, 15, however many teams you want. But you have to have a business plan that works. And there hasn't been a business plan that works. So from an emotional perspective, for fans of the PHF, and there are fans of the PHF, the reality is this was not something that was working. Because if it was, they wouldn't have gotten sold. There's no way. There's no way that the sale goes through, because the people who were running the PHF who sold know absolutely who they sold to. What's interesting, too, is if you look at the accounts for the PHF teams, they didn't know this was coming. They were posting, the Toronto Six, they were posting today. They were posting playful stuff up until about 2 hours ago, and that's about when this leaked out, that this is what was going on. So I don't think that the individual teams knew this was happening. I don't think the players knew it was happening. It pulls the rug out from underneath them, and it makes you wonder how rushed this sale was, and whether or not the group that bought the league came in and said, look, we know you're having financial difficulties, we can help. And maybe the league was desperate for that help and desperate to get out. They were desperate to sell. Motivated seller will often sell for less. I don't know how much money actually changed hands to buy the PHF. That's going to be interesting to see how much money changed hands. If the league has been losing money, it may not be very much. And then you have all of the costs to consider, and you're going to try to bring those down. And part of the issue I've had with it is, too, you have the PHF, you have the PWHPA. Now, you're always going to have those who say, well, all women's hockey players stink and they couldn't play bantam hockey with the boys and yada, yada, yada. But the reality is that if you have two separate leagues playing, the talent level will be at some point diluted, right? So by having a league of six teams, I understand there's women that are going to be out of work at this point, but it should increase the level of talent in the league. It should make the games more entertaining, right? So that's part of it. And it should generate new interest in the league as well. So it will be very interesting to see how this goes, what kind of a season we're going to have, and how new ownership makes the PHF make money, or if we're going to be back talking about this again. And again, I understand people who are ticked off about this and feel like it's a huge step back for women's hockey, but the other option may have been not having a league. That honestly could very well have been where it ended up, because this may have been one owner that was willing to come in and take over the PHF. There may not have been anyone else. So maybe it's a case of they said, we're going to have to sell, and this was the one option that they had. They may not have had another one. So we'll see how this story develops in the coming days. It is interesting to me. I know it may not be interesting to a ton of people, and when I do videos on women's hockey, they generally tend not to get very many views, which again just leads to that issue too. There are some good women's players in the game. They need to be marketed right. You need to have people that understand that that's out there, and you need to be able to get people to buy tickets. You need to be able to get people in the stands. You cannot be playing in front of 600 people and say, basically, well, we're going to try to grow this league. It's just not going to work. Junior teams couldn't play in front of 600 fans. So this is a situation that they definitely need to resolve, and maybe with new ownership they can. Maybe with the big names from the union coming into play, maybe that'll help. Maybe you'll get more sponsorships. Maybe more money will stream in. Because I don't think it was doing anybody any good to have the union on one side and the women's league on the other, and just sniping back and forth at each other, which has happened a lot over the years. It really has. It has been frustrating because, again, I'd like to see a league that works and a situation where women can make a living. I'm not talking about millions and millions of dollars, but make a living playing hockey. Sure, that would be the dream, and if they can make it work, sure. But it's a matter of having the right plan. So we'll see what the plan is in the coming weeks and months, and I will be here to report on it when that plan's known. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.